Well, good evening, David. Thank you very much for coming on, live with me now. It's coming up to 10:30 on Tuesday evening. But you said that there were some very important events happening with the Scottish National Party, and you thought that was worthy of giving a special update for the UK column viewers. So what's happening north of the border?
Well, there was a headline today which actually was very good, very well judged and summed it up in the local newspaper, the Daily Record, the Glasgow-based newspaper. And the headline reads, Joanna Cherry sacking a tremor before the SNP volcano explodes. And I actually don't think that's overstating it. So we reported on UK Column News Extra yesterday that Joanna Cherry had been sacked. So she was the front bench spokesman for the Westminster Parliamentary SNP group on home affairs and the legal affairs. And she was sacked for being not a team player. And Kenny McCaskill was sacked, presumably for the same reason. Now, these are all people who support Alex Salmond and who are calling for some degree of justice and some degree of transparency regarding what they perceive and what SNP insiders have for months been explicitly calling a stitch-up, a politically motivated witch hunt against Alex Salmond, generated by Nicola Sturgeon and her clique within the party. So we're talking about full civil war, and it's getting very, very nasty, and it's getting very, very it's coming to a crisis point. So the next thing I heard after the sacking of Joanna Cherry, late last night, I got a message that Joanna Cherry was in a safe house, having received a rape threat from men close to certain SNP MPs.
So this is utterly extraordinary, David. We're talking about members of the Scottish Parliament, and we've got a lady who's effectively in hiding because of threats that have come from somewhere inside the Scottish part, from persons, we'll say persons unknown at the moment, inside the Scottish Parliament. And all of this viciousness has arisen because of the backlash over the Alex Salmond case and supporters for Alex Salmond himself.
That's the principal reason for it, yes. Now, the Joanna Cherry is an MP in Westminster, so it's the Westminster group we're talking about specifically here. Right. And the report I had was that the people making the rape threats, which seem to have been viewed as credible, have close ties to members of the SNP parliamentary party. Don't know if that's true, but the rape threat certainly is true. It's been reported to the police. Joanna Cherry's made a statement to Police Scotland about it. And to give you an indication, firstly, of the bitterness and division within the parliamentary party, and there are various aspects to this which we'll try and outline, but the Alex Salmond case and the Alex Salmond prosecution is the most is most to the fore and is probably the biggest point of friction, but it's not the only one. So Joanna Cherry tweeted out that she had suffered this threat, and one of her fellow MPs responded that this is Kirsty Blackman, SNP MP, horrified, she tweeted, horrified to hear that one of my colleagues received a threat last night. This is totally unacceptable, and I condemn anyone who does this. I wish the police every success in bringing this individual to justice. I am also pleased to hear that Joanna was able to get somewhere safe. So this is confirming that she felt sufficiently threatened that she was in a safe house. But Joanna Cherry QC says, thank you for your concern, but this is what can happen when you rile up your base with lies and smears. Actions have consequences, so please think hard before you attack a colleague on social media. So Joanna Cherry here is saying that Kirsty Blackman is perhaps partly responsible for this. You're stirring up the base with lies and smears. So she's blaming her, and to some extent. So you see how bitter the whole thing is getting.
Well, it's not only bitter, David, it's malicious, isn't it? It's interesting that I'm using the same word that you used when you described the case against the two gentlemen, where you were talking about the judicial system in Scotland being malicious in its prosecution of two people. I'm using the same word again.
Yes,
we've got a vicious, malicious group of people in power in Scotland.
Now, so this is partly to do with the Alex Salmond affair, and it's partly to do with sexual politics, and it's partly to do with what's termed the turf wars. That's trans exclusionary radical feminists. So the radical feminists who do not subscribe to the trans agenda are in fairly open conflict with those who do. So that's another strange aspect, and it's almost like a proxy war. Nicola Sturgeon put out a long and impassioned speech in favour of trans rights just a few days ago, which was very heavily reported in Scottish mainstream media. That's part of the war, because Joanna Cherry and those who support her are fighting for what they perceive either as women's rights or as the gains of the feminist movement, which they see as being taken away when any man can suddenly say, well, I now identify as a woman, so I am one, so I can have access to all the rights and privileges that women have, and as Joanna Cherry would see it, that feminism has won for women. So they're against this. And this is a kind of strange proxy war. So the trans lobby have mobilized round Nicola Sturgeon. The anti-trans pro-women's rights lobby have mobilized around Joanna Cherry. So this is another aspect of the war. And it's almost like a proxy fight over the Salmond affair, almost. And it gets even stranger, because one of the SNP MPs was suspended for anti-Semitism some time ago, which we reported briefly on the column. And that seems to have been a means of deplatforming him, because he was on the wrong side, as it was perceived, of the fight over the trans agenda versus the women's rights agenda.
Right.
So all of the bitterness that the left in politics, with the intersectionality and intersectional politics, and all of the identity politics that has brought such division to politics as a whole, it's now been used within the SNP, who have been on the left and have been using these tactics. But they've now subdivided within the party, and they're using these tactics to try and deplatform one another. The comment that came from Kirsty Blackman, that Joanna Cherry was taking such exception to, was that Kirsty Blackman said that the SNP, there should be no place in the SNP for anyone who doesn't want a fairer and more inclusive Scotland. Now, that's code for anyone who opposes the trans rights agenda, or the trans rights agenda today, because we know that these things have no limit. The progressive politics is progressing to something very dark, and there is no end point. It will continually progress to more and more radical agendas. But if you resist that, Kirsty Blackman was saying that there's no place in the SNP for you. So you're seeing here the no platform and the driving out of opposition, the making of an alternative point of view beyond the pale to make things completely unsayable in the public discourse without being criticized for being, you know, literally Hitler. All of that overblown and very controlling and very febrile left-wing agenda is now being loosed from one half of the SNP onto the other. And that war's going on, and it's overlapping the war over the Salmon case, which is about corruption and lying and the misuse of power.
Right,
now,
David, and David, I'd have to come in here and say you're giving a very good analysis of this breakdown inside of the SNP as a result of the intersectionality agenda. But for the ordinary man or woman in Scotland, this is nothing to do with a government that's getting deeply passionate because people are losing their jobs, people are locked up under a curfew in their houses, people are suffering mental health problems they're not arguing and getting passionate about those sorts of things. They're talking about this specific socialist agenda, intersectionality, which they've helped create, and now it is destroying them. This brings to mind the phrase, "the revolution always eats its young." They started the poison with this particular agenda, intersectionality, and now it is eating them. Meanwhile, the rest of the country exists, and it appears that they don't care a stuff for the suffering of the average man or woman in Scotland.
Well, I would certainly say that's the case, because there's a couple of other aspects to this, right? One is Joanna Cherry has got a lot of credit, certainly amongst the SNP support, because she was one of the people who went to the courts over the Brexit scenario. And she was, in fact, trying to go back to the courts. And there was lots of strangeness where she was going to the Scottish courts and asking them to take on the legal personality of Boris Johnson and sign a letter if Boris Johnson refused to sign it. It got very strange, but she did get some wins at the court, particularly at the Supreme Court, where the head of the Supreme Court, Lady Hale, wearing her spider brooch, gave a finding that was very contrary to the viewpoint of the British government over Brexit. That was all part of Joanna Cherry's campaign. So she got a lot of kudos, a lot of support from the SNP membership over this. But when and she's also been opposing some of the fascist policies that have been coming out of Westminster, like the Act, which is the bill to make criminal conduct by law enforcement permitted, so that the police and other authorities can break the law. And she's opposing that. And yet, when she was saying things about the oppressive state, referring to London, when the named person scheme was going on, and I was asking her to comment on the named person scheme, silence. So she was quite happy to see the families of Scotland under oppression if it suited her political agenda or career or priorities. So she's a strange character in that she can stand up and fight for things that we would find ourselves on the same side as her, fighting some oppression, and she can be quite effective when she decides to fight, whether we agree with her or not. But other times, when we're looking at the anti-family agenda, for example, she's completely posted missing. Now, what we're now hearing is a very substantial part of the SNP MPs, MSPs are really getting to the end of the tether with this. The infighting, the civil war has been going on now for some years, and they're also completely sick of the corruption. I mean, they are absolutely speechless. I mean, they can't find the words to express how they feel about the sight of senior people within the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, Ian Blackford, etc., being part of a coterie, a small band that's gone out to destroy the reputation of Alex Salmond. And
what have these people done then, David?
Well, and they're so tired of the sight of this and the police being used and the Crown Office being involved, that what we're hearing is more and more are they're not standing. They're wanting out. They don't want to go on anymore. So
right.
We're seeing a collapse a collapse within the SNP, a collapse within the SNP as a party, so that it's going to just shed everyone who's not part of the Sturgeon clique. It's going to become, if it goes that way, ever more extreme.
And how many people are involved in this? I'll call it a revolt against the leadership of Nicola.
Well, I got some information tonight which suggested 40%, as in 40% of the MPs and MSPs.
40% are not going to stand again.
Or are wanting out. It was a bit vague. I haven't managed to get into the detail of exactly what they're doing or not doing. But we're talking about 40% who are extremely unhappy and either want out or don't want to continue much longer in their
right.
with the party going the way it's going now. So we've got this war. Joanna Cherry has now emerged as the leading candidate to oppose Nicola. There is credible rumours that Nicola Sturgeon won't be leader by the time the May elections roll round, because we've got elections, unless they're cancelled because of COVID, we have Scottish parliamentary elections in May this year. It seems quite likely, in that the bookmakers are favouring this in their odds, that Nicola Sturgeon will not be leader of the SNP come May. And if she has to go, and if the elections do go ahead in May, then clearly she's got to go really very soon. So this is coming to a head. Joanna Cherry is the obvious now leading candidate to replace Nicola Sturgeon, although she's an MP, not an MSP, and that'll be a little difficult. She seems to be the person that has emerged as the leading contender. Now, she's a lesbian. She's a radical feminist. She's very left-wing, ethnically Irish. She's got a viewpoint that is, what would you say? The left-wing, and coming from a minority community, there can be issues to do with essentially a victim kind of narrative, or certainly a very abrasive style that comes from this, very prone to oppose anything traditional, anything British, anything traditionally Scots. This is the kind of direction she will be moving in. So it's not really a huge change from Nicola Sturgeon, but what we're seeing is a party falling apart from the inside, because the ideology, the ideas that they've embraced carry with them such contradictions, such illogicality, and so many things where there is no logical end point where any peace can ever emerge, that eventually this type of revolutionary thinking just destroys itself. And we're seeing this. They are basing their support in Scotland on a substantial amount of core support for Scottish independence, which is the hardcore bedrock of that's probably about 30% of the population. And because that 30% see the SNP as the only vehicle to independence, they pick up those votes almost whatever else happens. But now we're seeing even some of those people are turning away. They can't stand the corruption. They can't stand the infighting. They can't stand the centralized control. Everything's centralized. Everything's locked down. No one can have a voice. It's all Nicola, Nicola, Nicola. And this is building up to an explosion point. It is like a volcano.
Okay, David, really excellent analysis. And I'm just going to, as an ending comment, I'm going to say this really brings us back into this idea of a psychological attack that's been unleashed. And the psychology, the damaging psychology, is affecting the wider UK general public, whether they're in England or Wales or Scotland. And of course, this same agenda is also impacting now on politicians. I think there's a lot that we can talk about in the future, but just fascinating that we're seeing a political agenda. I'm just going to mention the word again because many people have not really heard of it, or they're certainly not understanding it, and that's intersectionality. That this very poisonous agenda is now well, it's breaking up the SNP itself. So we got a lot of work to do on the psychology that's being used on people.
There was graffiti marked on the wall of St Andrew's House, which is the main government building in Edinburgh, Scottish office building, when it was originally constructed. And it said, "The SNP have left me. And why does Nicola Sturgeon hate women?" So this shows you how when the political movement starts to challenge everything that glues a society together. Now they've long ago been attacking the church. They've for many decades been attacking the family, but they're now attacking what it is to be a man or a woman. And people are reacting because they are realizing that this is an attack on ultimately on their very humanity. It's an attack ultimately on their society in such a way that they will not have anywhere left to be normal, to be human, to feel safe, to feel comfortable. There'll be nothing left that will be anything other than strange and threatening. And people are starting to see this and react against it. There is a lot of good news in that people are reacting against it. There's a lot of good news that perhaps some 40% of the SNP parliamentary groups are no longer willing to go along with this and stay silent. Or at least some of them aren't silent and many of them are just wanting out. So there's positivity there, but there's so few voices that are speaking the truth. There's so few voices that are speaking authentically, that the people who will come on and pick up the pieces of a shattered party will be very often worse than those who preceded them. Johnson came along after the disastrous administrations from May and Cameron, and he's proved himself to be worse. Look what he's done with the country, because there's nothing solid, there's nothing on which they base any right thinking or well-doing anymore. It's all about power, and it's all about a set of ideas that ultimately means the destruction of our society. Joanna.
So, David, does this mean that people in Scotland should really be thinking in terms of the independent? How do they get independent candidates to stand at this election?
Well, independents, or maybe some of the smaller parties that are coming up to fill the void left by all of the main parties marching off to this same basic drumbeat. But I honestly, I don't know what to advise people to do. There's some small parties that are speaking a bit of truth. People like the Scottish Family Party, they're embryonic at this stage. But yeah, perhaps giving some support to some of these other voices would be a step in the right direction. So just to close, Joanna Cherry, who might soon be SNP leader, she was saying that Scotland really doesn't need another independence referendum in order to be independent, because we could have the Irish option. Right now, initially I thought, what? We're going to have bloodshed and a civil war and terrorism, but that's not what she meant exactly. She meant that in 1918, when a majority of the Irish MPs elected supported Irish independence, there was then a discussion, a negotiation between the MPs and Westminster, and a deal was done on Home Rule. And she thinks that's the way forward. So she's suggesting that we lost in 2014. The Scottish people wanted to be part of the UK. So we don't want to lose again. We're not going to give people another say. We're going to use the electoral system, which, like all electoral system, has imbalances and skews and quirks. And we're going to get a means through that and through a lot of legalistic argument, because being a QC, she likes legalistic argument. And we're going to make we're going to subdivide Britain. We're going to remove Britain. We're going to end Britain, Great Britain, as a coherent political entity, using deals done behind closed doors, using legal arguments, and we're not going to ask the people.
No, what you're describing, I think we can use the term participatory democracy for what you're describing. Now, many people will pick up on the word democracy and think that means democracy, but participatory democracy does not mean democracy in as much as we've got freedom for the people and the people are going to make the decisions. All of the decisions are going to be made in government and via the agencies of the government. That's principally the public services and the civil service, which of course is no longer serving the civil population. It's simply working as a political agency for the government. So the decisions are going to be made in government, inside the public sector, inside the civil servant, and via the major charities and big businesses. That is what the definition of participatory democracy is. There's quite a lot of material about this on the UK Column website, which I think we'll be able to highlight. So really troubled times in Scotland.
Just to finish, Brian, a final thought. We've seen here a party which has had a great deal of electoral success. We've seen that they are now falling apart. They're destroyed from the inside. Corruption rules. Good people are disheartened and want out. And the fight is left between different cliques, none of which have an agenda, none of which have a program, none of which have a belief system which will generate peace and tranquility. So we'll be left with choices between increasingly toxic types of democracy. So if we're seeing something here, and it's a destruction of it's a self-destruction or the collapse of a party which has huge success, it's not coming about because of failure. It's coming because the corruption and the ideas within the party are so toxic, it cannot hold together even when it's successful. This is maybe something we're going to see more and more across the Western world. Democracy carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction, and we're seeing increasingly democracies becoming more and more embattled and less able to make coherent decisions and less able to explain a program which makes any sense, and more ruled by forces unseen and unloved by the public. So we're seeing the end days of democracy, and we're maybe seeing a little vignette of it in Scotland with the SNP. But I don't think it will be the last major collapse of a political institution in the UK in the coming years, and I suspect there will be many more to come.
Okay, David, thank you very, very much for that. I'm just going to really join. What have we got? We've got quite a long segment now on what's happening up in Scotland. I just want to end it by linking it back into something that I've been doing with Alex Thompson from UK Column. We've been talking about the psychological attack on UK. Part 2 has just been posted up on the UK Column website. There's already about 2,500 comments or thumbs up as a result of that, and about 800 plus comments. What do I want to, why have I raised this? Why do I want to bring it in? Because in part 3, which we're putting together at the moment, we're going to be talking about psychological attack in respect of internal politics. And what we're highlighting is that a KGB defector, Yuri Bezmenov, this is part of a book by a gentleman called Christopher Story, the EU collective enemy of its member states. And in a table, Bezmenov described how Western nations, in particular the UK, was to be undermined and effectively brought down by demoralisation and destabilisation from within the country. And in the section on internal politics, this is what he said would be done. Internal politics would be made aggressive. There would be a poisonous party antagonism or antagonisms. There would be a sense of drift. There would be a failure to get to grips with issues. There would be constant lying and equivocation. And there would also be cronyism and egotism. And I think that would sum up very nicely what you see happening. And what did they hope to achieve by creating that situation? They wanted to achieve infrastructure decay. So for Scotland, the country simply wouldn't work as a unit. National disunity, cynicism, posturing by the top leadership, lack of purpose, and government by spin doctorate. And I have to say that every section of the table that Alex Thompson and myself have been analysing has been that accurate in describing politics for the future. He was talking from 25, 30 years ago, and every one of the predictions is coming true. So if you go on the UK Column website, look top right, you'll see the link through to the psychological attack on the United Kingdom part 2, and you can get some background into our analysis on this breakdown of the political base within UK, whether it's in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, or north of the border in Scotland. David, any last points?
Well, just to say that is stunningly accurate, and it's amazing that it was written so long ago, because it sounds like it was written yesterday. And the piece by Yuri Bezmenov and the interview with Norman Dodd of the investigation in America into tax-exempt foundations are 2 pieces of video that everyone should watch. It's vital if you're going to understand what is happening and what is being done to the nations that we love.